for the Central User Experience team here at VMware. She has over 8 years of experience in the industry, having completed a master's degree in strategic human resources management. Dee will take us through the key steps to take in order to achieve a successful virtual interview. The past 12 months have seen most companies move to a complete remote working model, and the same has been said for interviews. This presentation, while useful for in-person interviews too, will focus mainly on acing the virtual interviews. Please enter any questions in the Q&A at the bottom bar, and without further delay, Dee, over to you.
Thanks so much for a wonderful introduction, Lynn. I'm delighted to be with you today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I'm based out of a very cold and windy Ireland, but I'm delighted to be with you here today. Before we dive right into some of my top tips for successful virtual interviews, I wanted to highlight some of the key differences between the virtual and on-site process. This list is not exhaustive, but for some of the top picks, I think it's pretty informative. So many candidates have said to me and my team that they enjoy being within their comfort zone when they're interviewing for our open roles. The key here is not to become too relaxed or blasé, as the same preparation is needed, if not just a little bit more. Second on the list here is cost, and this is true both for the candidate and the business. Removing the need to travel, potentially only needing a half day from work if you are currently working, that's a win. Companies historically would have flown candidates in for an on-site interview at the HQ or wherever the office is hiring. So this is definitely a good saving. In terms of efficiency, so this can mean a quicker process. So sometimes interview processes can be a little elongated, trying to schedule next steps based on availability of both the candidate and the interview panel. Given that we're working remotely, at least for the time being and have been for the last year, we found that we can work around candidates, calendars, their prior engagements. The same goes for interviewers. They can perhaps work a little later in the evening, take early morning interviews because they can do it from the comfort of their own home. In terms of the timing, so you can time your interviews around your commitments, around childcare, around your current job, which is very important if you are currently working, but there may be less time invested in the process overall. Not having to travel, not having to spend that time on the commute. You can do your interviews from your home office or a quiet space in your home. It definitely takes less time. The opportunities that are available to you, considering there's that removing the need to travel, you may be considered for opportunities that aren't in your current location a little bit easier. Considering everything is done remotely, we can interview candidates regardless of where they're currently based. Second last on the list is making a connection. I get this question so often from candidates. How can I make a connection in a virtual interview? When you're on site, you're there in person. It's easy to, bring your authentic self and really get your personality across. And honestly, practice makes perfect here. You can still be yourself. You're still the same person. Yes, you're seeing your interviewer on the screen and the same for them seeing you. But really, bringing your authentic self, having a little bit of practice time. Perhaps you don't like looking at yourself on a screen. There's ways to remove that, to minimize screens while you're on a Zoom interview. So that's my best advice there, really is the practice and preparation. And then lastly, one of the main key differentiators that we've talked about, not having to travel to the on-site interview, but remember you're doing everything using technology. You need to prep. Even if you use Zoom or whatever the platform is every day, please do test out any links. Make sure your camera's working, your audio. I know that sometimes with my headsets, it doesn't like to agree with me. It's a running joke amongst my team if any application fails that maybe I broke it. So perhaps it's good to check all of that well in advance of the interview. And again, on the day, a couple minutes before. The same way you would if you were traveling, you might check the route, how long it's going to take to get there, what's the best means or method. Do the same with your technology. Is that the best headsets? Can somebody hear you clearly? Test out perhaps with a friend or family member, and always test the link that the interviewer has sent to you or the recruiter that you're dealing with to make sure it's not broken, because these things do happen. And I think if that happens on the day of the interview, it's really not a welcome surprise. So I wanted to bring up the agenda for you, what we're going to cover today. So I've listed out 5 key things I thought would be useful. The first is research, second is mindset, accessibility, and this relates to any accommodations you might need. What I like to call ready, set, go. And this is the day of your interview, the steps that you'll take to get you from start to finish. And then lastly, the debrief, which is really important. And I'll talk you through that once we get to that part of the presentation. So, firstly, research. This really is your preparation. This is going to ensure your success during the virtual interview. So, the role that you're applying for, it may have been some time since you submitted the application. So, re examine the position description. Do you understand exactly what the team is looking for so far as possible? And if you have any questions, ask your recruiter, request a call with them if that's possible. Most will be open and they'll know the team better than anybody else that you have access to at this particular time. List out all the questions, and it should be a pretty short call. The company and organization, this forms part of the research. And really, it allows you to be ready for the why do you want to work here question. Something a little more substantial than I need a change or, I thought this would be a great place to work. Do a quick search, find out a little something about the company or this particular team so that you can answer that question with a real solid answer. The culture, mission, and values. So remember, you're not going on site. That's been removed. And, oftentimes that's where candidates get a gauge of what it might be like to work here, what the atmosphere is like. But you can do that. You can do some research. There might be some videos that are available remotely. So this will form part of that perception that you're going to have of potentially working for this company. The interviewers, you'll likely have their details. The recruiter or interview coordinator will likely share that with you. So do some research, look them up on LinkedIn, on any other platform that they're um, participating with. You might be able to find some talking points here. So this comes to, striking up that relationship with them. They may have worked somewhere that you've worked in the past. You may be alumni of the same school. You can find a lot of information online. And then the team may have some content out there. So there's GitHub, Dribble, Twitter, LinkedIn, depending on the role that you're going for and wherever they may be publishing information, have a read through. It will be really informative, will give some great talking points, and will allow you to learn more about the team. And all of this is from the comfort of your own home. And then preparation. So, research is preparation, but don't forget while you're researching the company, prepare and practice yourself. Almost do some research into your own past, the experiences that you've had in previous roles. Look at some typical interview questions. Go through some answers that you might like to give, because the more you talk, the more context you'll be able to give, the better examples, and hopefully, you won't come away from the interview saying, oh, I should have said that, or that would have been a great example. You'll have all that preparation done in advance. So I wanted to go through a method of doing that self preparation. So you've looked into the company, you've looked into the mission and values, you know the role at least as much as you can in terms of what the team is looking for from the job description, but now to answer the questions that relate to your experience. And this can sometimes be where candidates get a little bit daunted. They feel like they might not have the best answers. And really, the STAR technique is what you want to use. So S is for situation, T is task, A is action, or is the result. So the context, set the stage for the story. What was your responsibility? So that's the task. What was the goal? What actions did you take to achieve that? And then what was the result, the outcome? Quantify it. You need to show the results of all this work that you're after putting in. The example that's here on the screen right now, I've highlighted the different pieces that you need to cover. So the situation, short staffed, unrealistic deadlines. What was the task? You need to meet the deadlines. So what did you do to make that happen? creative request process, scheduling weekly meetings, keeping your team informed about what's happening, and then the results, what happened as a result of all this work that you did. And basically, you were able to complete everything in the backlog. Now, what's really important to remember, and this is mostly for the behavioral questions, interviewers do like to hear a lot of teamwork. And obviously, if the question relates to teamwork, you're going to use a lot of we and the work that we did together. With things like this, where they're asking for your specific input, use I rather than we so that they can really see the impact that you had in this particular situation. Moving on to mindset. This is my favorite piece of preparation. And I always tell my candidates to spend as much time as possible on this. So, according to research conducted by the National Science Foundation, around 80% of our daily thoughts can be negative. What between 12 and 60,000 a day, that can be quite a bit of negativity. So, it's important that you reframe the way that you think. Imposter syndrome is very real and it can take some time to overcome. So, essentially, what that is it's an internal experience of believing that perhaps you're not as competent as others, you don't deserve the job as much as they do, you've gotten this far because of luck, or the success that you've had isn't down to your hard work. But this is a mindset. It's important that you turn this limiting mindset on its head by telling yourself that your success is down to your competence, your efforts, and not down to luck. So you need to spend time on that yourself so that you can have the confidence that you need to get through the interview process. Shifting perspective. And again, this takes a lot of practice. You can do some exercises. If you fear failure, write an instance whereby failure helped you. If you're insecure about any skills, write some lines down on how you've got better, how you've improved since you started working on this skill gap. And that really will help you to shift your own perspective so that you can go into your interviews with a positive mindset. And overthinking the interview. An interview is a conversation. The interviewer wants to hear about how there could be a mutual fit based on the skills that you have and the need that the team has. Just because you don't address this specific skill gap at this time doesn't mean that you're not a great candidate. Getting the job isn't the only result or outcome. So think of some other key takeaways, whether that's expanding your network, getting practice at presenting, or doing technical challenges, building your confidence, or even working on your mindset, like you're doing here with this preparation. Take something else away and don't overthink the interview process as being just about getting the job. And lastly, preparation is key. All of this isn't something that you can do 10 minutes before the interview. You need to spend some time. You need to, put the time into yourself, into your own mindset so that you can present your best self on the day of the interview. Next is accessibility. And this is really important to me. I've done a lot of work with the accessibility team here at VMware. And since it was signed into law in 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life. So that's transportation, schools, public or private places, and you guessed it, with jobs also. And this doesn't kick in once you've landed a job. The ADA applies from the moment you go looking for a job. So if you need accommodations for interviews, please let your recruiter know. All of your interviews must be either physically or digitally accessible. You can ask for anything you might need. That could be a different platform, it could be a sign language interpreter. You may need to see the interviewer with their video on if you lip read, but if you tell your recruiter, they'll be able to put at least some things in place to make the process at least more accessible for you. When to ask for any accommodations is definitely a personal decision, but one of my top tips is always at the beginning of the process Try to find out what the entire process is going to look like. Will there be a number of phone screens? Will there be a technical challenge, group interviews, whereby that might be confusing, so that you can assess exactly what and when you might need some accommodations. Um, so yeah, I hope that's very apparent to everybody that just because we've moved to virtual interviewing, you still have the same rights if you require any accommodations. Ready, set, go. So this is something that I've come up with, and basically it's the day of your interview. So these are the three headings: ready, set, go. And each of these applies to different stages. So getting ready, again, this is long before the interview starts, possibly 60 minutes, couple of hours. Check your technology again. Just one more time, is the internet strong enough? Are you in a quiet spot? Is your headset working? Can you access the platform? Because that's really important. Presentation. So, what should you wear? How should you present yourself? And I always say, present yourself as you would for an on site interview. I know for me personally, I have what I call my interview clothes, or at least I did when I was working abroad and, doing some short-term contracts. And when I put them on, I was in the zone. I was going to an interview, I was looking my best, I had my professional clothes on. And I think it really does, shift that mindset into where you need to be to present yourself. Same with your work. If you're presenting a portfolio or presentation, make sure that you've gone through it. You know that it works. The audio or any other things that you've included are all working. As Olivia Shen Green mentioned on today's opening, one of the best pieces of advice that she got was to put post it notes on her monitor screen when she was going for her interview here at VMware. And if there's something like that that will help you, definitely go for it. The only thing I'll say about that is don't put too much information on post its because it will be very apparent if you're reading and they may actually distract you. But if there's one thing that you want to get across and definitely don't want to leave the interview without making it clear, put it on a post it. You're not going to forget. Silence any distractions, any notifications, your cell phone. You might have dogs like me that like to join in on some of my Zoom meetings. And again, you won't want that during your interview. And take that 10 minutes before the interview starts to psych yourself up. Okay, get yourself in a positive mindset. This is the job for you. You're going to put your best self forward. What are the other things you want to take away? Because remember, the job isn't the only outcome. Spend some time going through that. Getting set. So, this is before the conversation starts, but join early. Make sure you're the first one there. It can be quite daunting. If you're having a panel interview, if you arrive into a room and there's a whole host of people there before you, it's always setting the heart rate down lower when you're the first one there and perhaps welcoming other people to the call. Set your camera angle right. I've had a couple of instances where I've seen more chins than I'd like to on my screen. So having it directly in front of you so that there's a good angle. And if you join early, you have time to do that in privacy without the interviewers being there. And once the interviewers do join, introduce yourself. And if I have any interviewers here on the call, you have to do that too, guys. I do quality checks with my team, and there was one I joined and no introductions were made. I was like, you wouldn't do this in an in person interview. You have to tell the candidate who you are. So that's a tip for interviewers too. Then go. This is the content. This is your time to shine. Remember, it's a conversation. They want you to do well. Active listening. Do you understand the question? I have a great tip, and it's to use your mute function. When you're finished talking, press the mute, and the interviewer will know. Then it's their time to come back in. Clarify. Did I answer your question? Is there anything else I can add? If you're presenting work, the 80-20 rule, 80% is going to be what you're saying, 20% on screen. The STAR technique that we talked about a little earlier on, that's great preparation and use it throughout your interviews. And then ask questions. Don't leave saying, I should have asked that. And candidates ask me, what should I ask if they ask if I have any questions? Well, what would you like to know? It's an open forum. Do you want to know what it's like to work with this company? Do you want to know what challenges they face? Do you want to know what the expectations might be of you if you're successful? Go for it. They're asking you if you have questions. So if you do, put them out there. Lastly, thank the interviewers. We get a lot of thank you emails through, adding on LinkedIn, sending thank yous, but why not do it live? Tell them while they're there. They'll really appreciate it. And then lastly is the debrief. And I think candidates often think this is what the interviewers do, but it's important that you do it too. Decompress, debrief with yourself. What questions were you asked? Was there anything you could have answered better? Take some notes while it's fresh in your head. What would you do differently if you were to go through this interview process again? You're taking something away from this because it's a learning experience. Don't dwell on the missed opportunity if you would have said something differently, but take it as a learning. Do you have any follow up questions for the team, the recruiter, the hiring manager? While they're fresh in your head, put them down on paper and always remember that nothing is a waste of time if you use the experience wisely. Interviewing isn't the most natural experience. Your heart rate tends to soar. I'm sure if there was blood pressure monitors outside of interview rooms, they'd show some pretty high readings. But if you put some of this prep in place, you'll be much better able to handle that situation. And again, the more interviews you do, the better that you'll get at them because practice makes perfect. And at the end of the day, along with the theme of this year's conference, stay resilient. If you don't get this job, it's not to say that you're not a great engineer, technical writer, administrator. It's just that there wasn't a direct fit between skill and gap right now, but apply again, take the learning, and next time might be the time that you land your dream role with this company. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that this was informative. We try to get as much information as we could into a short space of time. But I'd love to take some questions if there was any while we have a couple minutes left.
Yes, I think we just have time for maybe one or two questions at the most. And I think we sort of addressed it, but one that came up was how to command attention of the interviewers during the interview process.
Yeah. So, look, there's eye contact, I use my hands quite a bit when I speak, which isn't ideal when you have a virtual background, but that's how I speak in real life too. So be your authentic self. Nerves will get in the way. You really do only have the screen. There isn't a huge amount of body language you can show. If eye contact is something that you're capable of, that's obviously a great start. But remember, if it's not, that's not to say that you can't do the job. I would say be yourself, talk about your experience. If you like to use an icebreaker, do that. Do as you would for an on site in person interview. Um, and you can still get your authentic self across. It just takes some practice. Perhaps record yourself and see how you come across on camera, and you'll be able to get some tips from that.
Okay, unfortunately, I think that is time, but we will still, Dee and I will still be answering chats that questions that popped up in the Q&A. So if you think of anything, feel free to input them in the chat and we'll be sure to follow up on those.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.